Hi, and welcome to the New Mission Career Transition Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Caprellian, and I'm joined by my co-host, HR professional, and sister, Alexandra Caprellian. Today's guests are Daniel Pierce and Jake Brown, the duo that make up Brown and Pierce Consulting, a premier recruiting agency focused on supply chain management and logistics recruitment and direct placement of managers and executives. Dan and Jake were Marine Corps officers before they started their journey into recruitment services, and today they are partners dedicated to connecting top talent with leading supply chain management companies. Jake and Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here. We appreciate it, Chris.
Happy to be here, Chris.
Welcome, guys.
Yeah, Dan, alumni to the podcast. When we were only doing audio, now we have a video component. But great to have both of you on, former Marine Corps officers and now partners of your own consulting company. And we'll definitely get into that. But first, we want to introduce you to our listeners and go about your background so people know where you're coming from. Jake, we'll start with you. And I've got some softballs here, but where'd you grow up and how did you join the military and your occupational specialty?
Yeah, awesome. So I was born in Texas and raised in New Mexico. We moved out there. My father actually worked for the National Laboratory out there. So that's what took us out that way to the Southwest. It's a beautiful part of the country, especially up in the mountains. And I was kind of that homeschooled kid that was very active in JROTC and things like that. The military was just something I always wanted to do, but I was really fortunate that I had some outstanding mentors who helped me, come to a plan for how that would work out and the best way to go about doing that. And so they clued me into the Naval Academy. I had no idea what the Naval Academy even was, living out in the desert in the middle of nowhere. But they encouraged me to go for it. They helped me with my application. And ultimately, I was fortunate enough to get accepted. And so I went to Annapolis. 4 years later, graduated in 2016 as a Marine officer, and then went to TBS and became a manpower officer. So it was the adjutant was the title back then. And I didn't know that it was going to be as relevant at the time, but the time that I spent in the Marines as a manpower officer was really formative in what I'm doing now. So that's my quick story.
Awesome. And where were your last two duty stations?
Yeah, I started in Camp Lejeune with the 2nd Tank Battalion as the adjutant for them. And then I went to a small unit, the Security Cooperation Group on Fort Story in Virginia Beach. So.
Oh, no kidding. My backyard.
Yeah.
So you know the area well. All right. Well, thanks for that. Hey, Dan, how about you?
So, unfortunately, no one encouraged me to go to the Naval Academy when I was growing up. It's just no one even brought that to my attention at the time. But what I did was I enlisted in the Marines and left 2 weeks after high school. And I'm very fortunate that was a decision that I took. It was a great experience for me at a very young age to pursue my dream of always wanting to be a Marine. I grew up all over. I was a Navy brat prior to, so it's not unusual for me to have a long conversation when someone says, "Where are you from?" It's a bit difficult. But after I joined the Marines, I became a crew chief and mechanic on CH-53s and VH-60 Novembers in HMX-1 in Quantico. Then I left the service after 5 years as a sergeant, went to Virginia Tech, got my degree, came back in, commissioned as a 1302 engineer officer, and really enjoyed that aspect of seeing the ground side after doing aviation. And then from there, last two duty stations was in Iwakuni, MWSS 171, and then MCRD Paris Island as a series commander.
All right. Well, thank you. Now I'd just like to transition about, what you did after you left the Marine Corps. So Jake, after you left the Marine Corps, what did you do? And maybe if we can glean a little bit of information and lessons learned on your transition. What was that like?
Yeah, great question. I certainly wouldn't consider myself an expert in the transition. My transition out of the Marines was actually fairly chaotic. I didn't have a great plan. I had some options that were available to me, but kind of one of the big reasons I wanted to get out was that I felt like I had accomplished all of my goals in the Marines, and I had this entrepreneurial streak that I see common in a lot of other Marines, especially and the officer side as well. A lot of people want to get after it, start their own business, make a lot of money, and do great things in the business world. And so as I was transitioning out, I thought that was going to be the route for me. Not a lot of people know this. I actually tried to start, and I ended up flopping with a small scale tech consulting company for churches. I was going to help them modernize their tech services, their audiovisuals, their software, their website, and things like that. And it didn't really work out so well. I didn't have any understanding of things like sales and business development and certain things like that. So I ended up on a track for law enforcement, but it just didn't seem like the career that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And then what was interesting is I actually got recruited into recruiting with an organization that reached out to me on Indeed and just kind of messaged me out of nowhere and said, "Hey, we think you'd be great at recruiting. Do you want to give it a shot?" And I said, "You know what? Let's do it." And that kind of led me to where I'm at today and understanding the whole world of recruitment and what can be done in this field. So,
And what kind of recruiting did you do in the last place that you worked at?
Yeah, it was all focused on manufacturing roles. So initially, we would do pretty much anything from engineering to operations, maintenance, things like that within manufacturing companies. Towards the latter half of our time there, we actually focused really specifically on helping veterans transition from the military into manufacturing. And Dan and I led that program at the organization. So it was really an enlightening experience on how we could make an impact to the veteran community. And it just felt like it really fulfilled my calling and what I could do to kind of give back to the community as well as just help job seekers writ large.
Well, Dan, what was your experience like getting out of the Marine Corps? And then how did you transition into the recruiting and consulting space?
Yeah, so I had a very, in retrospect, I think a rather smooth transition, and I'm very grateful that it went that way. I did a lot of prep work up front to make that happen, but by and large, I didn't have to seek many opportunities. I got really lucky and very fortunate to find that the company that I applied for via SkillBridge when I was transitioning out was the recruiting agency that Jake and I worked at previous to this. And it ended up being not just something that was a stepping stone for me, it ended up being something that I really loved doing. So I found a career post-service via SkillBridge that I'm still doing today. And I'm very fortunate for that. I explained a little bit more in a previous podcast about my reasons why, and anyone interested in it, feel free to reach out or go back to the prior podcast. But if you want me to talk further, I can.
Well, I know, you know what? That's a great point. We'll make sure that we put the link in the episode notes to the older episode. But yeah, no, it's interesting how both of you, two different paths, somehow ended up in the same occupation world. One with manpower officer experience, the other one with combat engineer officer experience. And I'm sure you probably leveraged some of your experiences, and that's kind of what's making you successful today. So I know that you both worked at the same employer previously, but now I'd like to kind of transition to what you're doing today, specifically the founding of Brown and Pierce Consulting. So what's the company's origin story? How did that start?
Yeah, happy to answer that. So Dan and I were working together for some time at our last organization. And really, I think we both kind of started asking ourselves, could we do more, right? As recruiters, we live in this intersection of struggles where job seekers have a really hard time finding meaningful work. And at the same time, on the other side of things, employers have a really hard time finding top talent. So we knew that the career field of recruiting was something we really loved and we saw ourselves in for the long term. The question became, do we need to go it alone though at this point in time? Can we do more? Is this the right time? How are we going to do this? And what I say is the answer to all those questions eventually became, yes, it is time. It is the time to do this. And so essentially we kind of looked at the market and saw that there was a really underserved niche in supply chain management, that this is a very underserved market in terms of specialized headhunting and recruiting services. And also that by and large, a lot of companies, a lot of recruiting agencies in particular, aren't doing recruiting all that well. It's very transactional. It's kind of like they're just chasing the placement fees. And we thought that we could do better while making an impact on the workforce as a whole. So one of the things I love about recruiting, and especially about Brown and Pierce Consulting, what we've been able to do already, just in the short time since we've launched, is create wins for everybody. That's wins for job seekers, wins for our client companies, and of course, one of the things that recruiters always win last, but we win too. So it's just a great field to be in, and we're really proud of where we've come so far.
Mm. And I bet it's nice also being your own bosses and then working together. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you had mentioned that, so Brown and Pierce Consulting, you focus on supply chain management roles. And as a guy that works in military logistics, sometimes it's hard for me and for others to gauge, well, what does logistics really mean? So in the military, as both of you know, and Dan, I gave Dan a Marine Corps doctrinal publication for quote, just on what it is, but it spans supply, maintenance, transportation services, general engineering, health service support, and then services that could be mortuary affairs and finance. So we say, I work in military logistics, but I have no idea what that actually means when I'm trying to translate that into, like, let's say civilian speak. Like this is what I deal in. Help me understand, what does logistics, when I say logistics or supply chain management, what does that mean in the private sector?
Just want to start by saying that I think when we talk about supply chain, it touches so many aspects of what happens in our economy. And that's what makes it a unique space to recruit in. But when you're looking at a logistics position, just know that there are many different nodes in the supply chain for which that type of role can be found. So it even takes a little bit more clarity to determine in what space do you want to find this role, whether that be transportation or as a broker in manufacturing, as a shipper. Do you want to be the logistics manager in a warehouse and distribution facility, port facility? So when we think about supply chain, it really is a massive interconnective thing. And it's got just a ton of opportunities within. So to answer the question, I think as it relates to military logistics and MCDP4, for instance, there are translatable roles and skill sets. So if we talk about, for instance, maintenance to me is one of those big ones where it's immediately like, if you were a motor transport maintenance officer or a motor transport logistics officer, 0402, and you wanted to continue on in that, there are directly translatable positions out in the civilian world, whether that be at transportation companies or service companies that provide maintenance and service to the transportation industry. So there are those nearly direct compatible relationships with military MOSs out there. And by and large, companies see that and value that. So certainly able to go through a little bit more in depth, but before I start getting carried away, Jake, is there anything else you wanted to add at this point?
I think that was a great answer, Dan. It really captures kind of the essence of what we've seen. There's a lot of direct transitions from the military that work out really well, and some others that you might not think about, things like sales roles that veterans actually end up doing really well in.
What kind of positions do you focus on, your consultancy?
All right. So I'll just say sales and management is typically where we find the best use for our services.
And when you're placing folks, I'm sure it runs the gambit of, hey, this is somebody who's younger in age, probably less experienced, varying degrees of education or training, all the way up to probably older, middle-aged folks that have some industry experience. Kind of what kind of, and I know I'm talking about the individuals that are job seekers. So when we say client, I don't know, I'm asking a bunch of questions in one statement, but what's the vernacular? Who is the client? And what is the experience level or breadth that you normally deal in?
Sure. So for us, our client in our vernacular, the way that we would describe a client is a company that is partnered with us on mutually agreed recruiting agreement terms, that they outsource that responsibility for us to find them talent for the positions that they need. When we speak about client, that's typically how we associate that thought. The candidates that we work with, we advocate for them equally as much as we advocate for our clients. But it is a very specific matching search that we intend to do. So in answer to your question, I think the best way we could reference this is to give some examples of some of the roles that we filled. Our first placement was a Army veteran, and the company that wanted us to find someone was looking for a chief solutions officer for a consulting of supply chain. So their whole business was providing efficiencies, process improvements, and supply chain consulting to their clients. And they needed someone with a PhD level, Lean Six Sigma, black belt would be great. The laundry list, the wish list of what made a unicorn candidate. Jake and I consulted with them and we began the search. And very happy to say that our first placement was at that level with a veteran, which was great for us. But that's sort of how the relationship works. We get the conversation going, get the assignment, and then we execute. So that was the picture painted for that role. We have also done sales executives, business development executives, and we're currently working parts managers and warehouse managers, as well as we'll even do maintenance. So a diesel technician to keep the trucks up and moving is something that we'll talk about as well.
Essentially, like if it was easy, then they would have handled the placement themselves. You're out looking for the hard to place unicorns. And maybe you can speak to this too. Like if I'm a company and I'm trying to fill my talent needs, I mean, even as a guy that's getting ready to start circulating my resume, hearing the stories of you've got 400 resumes and they all seem to be pretty well matched. I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, part of the service you provide is you take some of that manpower and those man hours that are going to have to be dedicated to sifting through all that and try and streamline their process by ultimately giving them the product, i.e. a candidate that places well. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And
okay.
You think, like you mentioned, that's one of the things that we see out there is you'll see a generic job posting. And I want to pause and say to our partners' credits, a lot of them are very capable of doing this recruitment, but perhaps they are at a size of business in which they cannot provide the in-depth time to do it. Maybe their HR manager is just strapped with all the other responsibilities that they have to do. And that's typically where we find our niche to work with is people who are just tapped out on time, because time is essentially what we're doing is we're giving them back their time to execute the service and have the trust placed in us to do it well. So sifting through all those resumes, absolutely right. And what I would say a step further is even for the candidate side and advocating for a candidate, if you have a hiring manager who's got a million other things to do that day and they're flipping through resumes and it's 7 seconds per resume and they have 300 on an Indeed post or LinkedIn, those candidates aren't getting much time. What we offer is a peel back behind the curtain to say, not only is this a resume that deserves more than 7 seconds of a look, but here is why they are great fits. Here's their education. Here's their experience. Here's why they want the job. Here's their salary range. Here's that they're local. So we have those conversations up front to provide not just a resume, but context behind a person. And I think that's incredibly valuable.
That's interesting. So it almost sounds, and I know I'm kind of going away from the candidate side, but on the business side,
Sure.
It clearly paints a picture that, your ideal client isn't necessarily a large corporation because they would have their own HR department and probably sufficient capacity to be able to do some of the services that you provide. It's the company that's kind of the mid-size that has enough HR capacity to meet their business and statutory requirements, but not necessarily enough capacity to surge to either help that company scale or fill critical roles that are now vacant. I mean, is that a good summation?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, go ahead, Vic.
Yeah, I absolutely would say that that's accurate. One of the approaches, we called ourselves Brown and Pierce Consulting. So we really want to do in our process to distinguish ourselves from kind of your traditional staffing and recruiting firm, which is just putting bodies in open seats, is that we really seek to understand the business problem that hire is going to solve for the organization. Most of the time, we're talking directly to the company executives and trying to just understand, okay, so you guys say you want to hire, you've got this job posting out there. What is it you're really trying to accomplish? What problem are you trying to solve? And how do we get to that point? Everyone wants to hire a rock star, but there's also not a lot of dedicated resources, support, and even the funding sometimes to get those people on board. And so we really take a consultative approach and try to get in there and actually understand how we're going to really solve the underlying problem for them, not just provide a body for the open spot.
That's fascinating. It's like helping them make sure that they don't solve the wrong problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's great. I kind of want to glean some of your knowledge and experience on helping to talk to others that are preparing for their own transition. So I'd ask that you'd assume that you're a service member, whether that's like not quite career, but enlisted or junior officer, or even senior officer with a background in military logistics, and they're preparing for their transition. How should they pursue a role in the civilian sector that's comparable to what it is that they do? Presuming that they want to do that, they have strengths that they want to leverage and bring to the private sector. Kind of how should they start their journey in trying to pursue that?
I think when I think about it, things I could have done better when I was transitioning, and what I would counsel anyone leaving the military on what's important right now to do, whether your transition is coming up in a few months or whether it's next week. There's a few core things that I think really make a huge difference. The first is having an understanding that this is a really tough job market. A good job is hard to find right now more than ever. If you look at the statistics, the BLS reports that it's taken over 5 months right now for job seekers to find their next role. And that's a really long time to go without a paycheck. And so getting started right now and having an understanding of what you're going into, that a lot of people right now on the candidate experience side, which is what I'm focused on day to day, is very much on that candidate side. A lot of people are facing a lot of rejection. They're facing ghosting. There's a handful of scammers out there too you got to watch out for. And so really understanding that the volume that it's going to take for you to find the right role for you, the amount of networking it's going to take, the amount of applications you'll have to submit, the practical, like what do I do right now? The practical things I would counsel anyone is, number one, square away that resume, get it done professionally, or go to Harvard's resume guide, which is an excellent resource. Maybe we can link that to afterwards. But Harvard's resume guide is perfect. Having a really tight resume that's quantified your achievements. Most people just list their job descriptions. You want to stand out, and the way you do that is by putting the numbers in there. The second thing is absolutely perfect your interview skills, because that's going to really make the difference in getting you from the interview stage to an offer, is how well you interview. And then finally, it's just keep applying, keep networking, and have the motivation to continue in spite of rejection. And if you spend any amount of time on LinkedIn, you're going to see a lot of people talking about the rejection they faced. You just have to understand you can get a job. The right job for you is out there, and it's going to be a lot closer than you think if you have a great resume, awesome interviewing skills, and you're applying and networking like there's no choice.
No, that's great. I actually want to ask you a little bit a question regarding the resume. I've talked to a lot of people about resume writing, and I understand entirely why a lot of individuals that work to help service members, whether it's through the transition office on an Army base, Air Force base, or Marine base, they all advocate and provide classes on how to generate your own resume. And I've done it, and I've had a lot of good feedback. But I also know that even taking that course, it gets me there about 80 to 85%, especially if I know what it is that I'm applying for and I'm looking on Indeed and I'm at least gleaning it from a job description. It's that additional 15% that seems to be a little bit challenging. Now, you had mentioned paying somebody to do a resume. Is that like the option that you see most of your candidates do? Or what resources are you aware of other than the Harvard resume guide, which, by the way, I'm gonna link that and I'm gonna look at it after this thing. How should people focus on generating that resume, generally speaking?
Yeah, you don't have to pay someone to do it. What you do need to do is talk to people who have good resumes, who have made that transition successfully, and say, hey, do you mind sharing your resume so I can see what works? I think some really important statistics to know about it. And just to sort of qualify myself a little bit here, I'm a certified professional resume writer as well. I went through an organization called the PARW to get that certification. And I also actually did it as a side gig for a long time before I focused solely on recruitment. So a couple things about it is that the average resume only gets looked at for 6 to 8 seconds. And so if you've got a resume that's 3-4 pages long, where you're really getting into the weeds of what you did throughout the military, just know that a lot of it's really not going to get read. So focus it on those numbers, focus it on the metrics, the awards, the successes, things like that. And then the other statistic is that the average job posting gets over 200 applicants, and only 2% of those people that are applying get an interview. And so as you're going through the process, having an understanding that your resume is going to communicate a certain skill set to an employer, making sure that it's tailored appropriately, that it's succinct, to the point, and short, so that as they're scanning those resumes, you actually stand out, and then that it's aligned with what the company is seeking is really, really critical. Like I said, you don't have to pay someone to do it. There are services out there, but you can get it done by following really great formatting. That's what Harvard Resume Guide is great for, is more like the formatting and the style setup versus the content itself. One of the best resources is the Veterans Network at large, and just seeing, hey, what works for you guys, and what has worked in the past. I want to just offer myself as a resource as well. I look at resumes for veterans all the time for free. I'm not charging anyone for anything for that. And we do help our candidates specifically when we are looking at placing them in a role. We help them clean up their resumes as well, so that they get the absolute best chance at an interview with our clients.
No, we got 1 million listeners that are going to jump on that. I don't know if we have 1 million listeners, but that's
I might have made a mistake.
I would like to pretend that was a massive mistake, but that's quite an offer, Jake, and definitely appreciate that. We talked about generating a resume, also preparing for the interview. What are other things that potential candidates or those that are job seekers do to maximize their competitiveness? I mean, I'm guessing that if individuals have an opportunity to get certifications that are tangential to the sector, the private sector, and specifically what it is that they want to do, they should capitalize on that. Is that correct? Also, and in line with that, if they're in the middle of working on something, but they're still circulating their resume, is that something that they should still put on the resume with some type of annotation saying that's anticipated? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say yes. I have seen resumes that say in progress or expected 2025 fall. And I think that's important because it also implies that they're driven and they have continual improvement in mind. So yeah, definitely put it on the resume. And if you're working with a recruiter and they're trying to match you to a job that requires that qualification, it's at least worth a conversation from the recruiter to say, they're almost done. They're about to get it next month or so. So I would not allow that to preclude you from pursuing opportunities if you're in progress. As far as having the certifications, certainly there are some industry-specific certifications that can assist when you're looking at roles in supply chain. I would encourage anyone to go take a look at APICS, Association for Supply Chain Management certifications. There are some directly transferable or near to transferable positions for folks in finance, supply, and logistics. And that could be anything from like a buyer, procurement. And a lot of these types of certifications just prove that you have industry knowledge, and companies value that. Aside from that, pretty much any sector has these types of associations, accreditations, certifications, or memberships. And it's truly incumbent on the transitioning individual to do that research because it will give you a leg up. Even if you come to the interview and you haven't even started, and you know that maybe to get to the next level of that senior management position, you'll have to have that cert. Just because you know it shows that you've done your research, and no one else is going to do that for you. So that's how I would go about saying certifications are important to a degree.
In line with certifications, based on what you're seeing in the labor market, what's the relevance of the college degree today? I know, or at least I've heard on the fringes, that depending on what you actually do, there's kind of more of a reliance on the certifications that one could get as opposed to a bachelor's degree being pretty generic. But I don't know if that's really true, particularly when we're talking about our enlisted service members that are getting ready to transition and have to luckily, if they know that they're getting out 2 years in advance, how do they balance their time? Because what is more than likely going to result in a payoff when they transition into a new role?
I would say that there's kind of a both and here. Number one, it never hurts to have a bachelor's degree. So especially taking advantage of what the military offers in terms of education benefits is huge. But it's absolutely not a what I would say a hard and fast requirement that you need one, especially if you're doing something like turning wrenches or in a very kind of technical field. Having those certs adds extra credibility. What we have seen is that at specific levels, those work in combination. So having a bachelor's in the right kind of field, in addition to certifications, really takes candidates across the finish line. Whereas if they hadn't pursued those certifications and said, well, I've got a bachelor's, I'm fine with that, then they may not have been as competitive. So that's something that we've seen. I don't know if Dan has more to add on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think broadly speaking, degrees are still valued and will open more doors than not having one. And I think that's well understood. However, there are pockets of the industry and also of the hiring managers who do value experience and skill sets. And Jake and I just sat down with the general manager in Jacksonville last week. We asked him about a manager position that we're trying to fill on his behalf that we're looking for right now. We said, what about education? And he said, I am ground up. I started off as a technician, 18 years. I don't have an associate's degree. I care about what they can do. And this is from the mouth of a general manager. So you'll find that there are exceptions to that rule. We had conversations with former Marines who are now general managers in logistics companies. One is actually the president of his own logistics company. That was a great conversation. He was a former infantry officer. And, I'll tell you, we asked him specifically, this president of a logistics company who's former infantry officer, we asked him, do you think it's a good career field for veterans? And specifically, do you think it needs to be job-specific transition, as in supply chain manager, supply officer? And he said, the type of training that we get in the Marines, also, if there's other people from the different branches of the military, you as well. But he said, the type of training we get in the planning, execution, and the carrying out of all the different contingencies that can occur is top tier. So when you end up coming into a position in supply chain management, you have the foundations, and then you just need to begin to translate some of the definitions into the civilian world speak. And yeah, I guess to get back to the point of it, degrees are important. If you don't have one, don't be dissuaded from pursuing opportunities, especially if you know there is a prior service member in a position of leadership at that company. You can use LinkedIn. You can reach out directly. It may not end up in a job, but it may end up in a clearer path for you to achieve the role you want by having a conversation.
So individuals that are getting ready to transition and they know that they're going to be, you can look on Indeed and they have some amazing filters, but it still is a bit intimidating. And then having talked with you and others that do recruitment, what are the benefits of an individual that wants to be employed through a recruitment agency? And how does that connection even made? I mean, I understand you might have one method, but you have an understanding and a pulse on, what does the industry do as far as those companies that provide recruitment services? Is it a potential candidate reaching out to them, or do they get sought after by those companies? And what's the advantage of doing that?
So I would say that one of the huge advantages of working with a recruiter is that you can identify which job openings and which job postings are really high priority for companies. The reality is that a lot of job postings out there are not the number one thing on employers' minds. So that's one reason why people submit so many applications and just don't hear back, is because it's one of 35 different job posts that are up for a company website. On occasion, there's some that they're just kind of, looking for good talent, but not actually even really that serious about hiring. But if you're contacted by a recruiter about a role, that company is really serious about getting someone in it, because they're going to be paying a headhunting fee to get someone on board. So that's probably one of the biggest advantages, I would say, is that the job posting is going to be really important. The company's invested in it. And then also that you have advocates on your side. So we're able to help. Sometimes we've done some really successful negotiations recently where we've gotten people 10, 15K more than they were even initially expecting to get out of a role because we've been there advocating for that candidate throughout the entire process. So lots of advantages for working with a recruiter, as well as just a general resource for what the job market is looking like. We talk to literally everyone out there, anyone that's hiring. The chances of Dan having called that company are extremely high. So just providing general information as well on the job search. So,
and how is that transaction facilitated? I know that there are a lot of myths and certainly in the military about what it's like actually going through a placement company or a recruiting firm on, like they're giving up a lot of their paycheck for the first 3 years. Maybe you could speak to, like, generally, how does that transaction work for an individual that goes through a firm like yours or similar?
Yeah, I would say, just to kind of clarify and hopefully dispel that myth, is that it doesn't cost the candidates anything. And then the companies, when they're doing it, they do pay a fee, but that's usually, number one, we've never had a scenario where that comes out of the candidate's paycheck. And oftentimes it's something that, again, we help them get even higher than what might be advertised, because the companies invest in bringing someone on board, and we're able to tell them, hey, if you want a top guy who can do the things that you're asking for, this is what you got to pay them. And it's never a negotiation of like, well, it comes out of the candidate stuff. If anything, if I can share this, Dan, what we've often done is actually compromised on our fees for the services we provide to get that candidate in the door. So we make sure that we're never the barrier to a hire. And so the value that we provide is usually, it is something that hopefully not a lot of people are hearing that, because the reality is we just do provide a lot of value in the process.
So essentially, at the end of the day, it's like a company that's outsourcing a specific subset of HR to find somebody to find individuals that can place in their employment gaps and their position gaps. And it's not necessarily a transaction between the candidate and the recruiter who's taking a certain percentage off the top. That's the salary you negotiate for that position is the salary that they're getting, and your fee is a completely separate transaction, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thanks. Sis, do you have any questions?
I had 5, and then I kept marking them off going, oh, well, that was just asked.
Does that mean I get 5 stars?
I know, you can go into HR.
No.
No.
I will hurt somebody's. I will hurt a business if I did that.
No, I worked for a couple of companies that actually never hired vets, and it wasn't something that they were dissuaded from, or it just was something that they didn't really think about focusing on or opening their doors to. And I think that just is because of the talent program that we had, just didn't have that, the resources to really search into it. So when you work with companies as your clients, how do you get buy-in for potential companies that actually haven't hired vets?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a lot involved with an education piece. And we don't want to assume anything. So when we submit a candidate, I've gone so far as to even go find online what their MOS means and the definitions of it broken down through a DoD website, to share that with the hiring managers. Say, yes, they have not necessarily the industry experience on the civilian side. However, their MOS is a near perfect match in expectations of what they do on a daily basis to what you're looking for. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can look at the resume, and then you can look at this DoD website. So that's just like one small thing we'll do. But before we even get there, it's a conversation about what veterans bring to the table beyond hard skills. And we find that the conversations had generally turned out to be pretty great, and people are pretty well receptive to it. And some of the bigger companies now, if you go and look and seek them out, they have dedicated recruiters for the veteran community. If they're at a point of their business growth where they're able to have a dedicated veteran recruiter, I think that they find value in that, and they do that. And until companies evolve to that point, we're happy to have conversations about how we can bridge the gap of understanding those comparable skills and experiences.
And I can imagine that's actually very helpful, especially for the candidate who goes into this potential interview, having those discussions, having a sense of relief, knowing that there has been the prior discussion of why they would be a good candidate because of their background, even if this is the private sector, so they don't feel too strapped of having to explain every single thing because it might have already been brought to their attention prior.
We definitely soften them up a little bit, just to the idea of it. And we're happy to help do that.
Great.
All right, Jake and Dan, we're coming to the part or the end of our podcast where I ask our guests the same question. If there are 2 or 3 things that you think that service members should keep in the back of their mind as they're preparing for their own transition, what are they? And Jake, we'll start with you first.
Yeah, I'll keep it pretty simple. Get your resume done, work on your interview skills, and start networking and applying to jobs. And a quick story I forgot to tell about the resumes and the importance of it. One of my greatest success stories. We worked with an Air Force veteran who was a really stellar guy, had all of the talent. A lot of veterans are extremely talented, but he didn't really capture that well on his resume. We cleaned it up for him, and he got a same-day interview with SpaceX and ended up going with a different company. But the power of, like I said, starting with the resume, getting it done well, that's a testament to it. And really hope that every veteran out there or a transitioning military member is starting with the resume and really paying attention to this process.
Great. Dan?
Yeah, I think what I said last time is still true in that it is a very important thing to do, to have sincere conversations, informational interviews with people that you trust, or can get an introduction to from someone you know and trust. To have that candid conversation about the career field you intend to enter, to uncover some of the things that you may not be able to find by a Google search. I had a very close friend of mine who joined the Marines the same time, commissioned the same time. He got out of the service and was in a bit of a limbo trying to figure out where he wanted to go. And he wanted to go into HR. So I connected him with a colleague of mine at the time who had years of HR experience, just to help solidify that thought process. And those are conversations that you can have today, whether you're a year out, 3 months out. I thoroughly I encourage people to have real conversations. People are willing to help. And I think you'll be surprised once you try to reach out and find some answers. Other than that, stay resilient, keep on it. And, it's an opportunity now to change the path that you were on, and you don't necessarily have to do the same thing you were doing. So be excited in the future and the opportunity, and really fortune does favor the bold. So go after what you want to do.
Nice.
Fortune favors the bold. I'm going to write that down. That might be my new mantra.
Yeah.
Okay.
The original quote from Dan.
Great. Well, how can our listeners get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your company, or just connect and ask a couple of questions that we didn't think of asking you?
You can find us on our website, which is www.brownandpierce.com. And then if you want to shoot us a message or DM or anything like that, LinkedIn is the platform that I am most active on. So you can reach out to me there.
Likewise, I am also on LinkedIn, and my email is super easy. It's daniel@brownandpierce.com. Always happy to have a quick conversation with folks. If I can't help you, I will certainly do my best to put you in touch with someone who can.
All right, great. Well, thanks. We'll make sure that we get all of your contact information in the episode notes. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on. This is very informative for me. And thanks for our millions of listeners. Thanks, Jake, for volunteering to provide free services. But no, this is great. It was good. And Dan, it was good reconnecting with you. And
you as well.
I'll tell you what, I love seeing Marines start their own companies and crushing it. I kind of live a little vicariously through your LinkedIn postings, because it's great to see. It's great to see both of you thriving. So, hey, thanks again for coming on, sharing your knowledge, and we'll be in touch.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Chris. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
And Jake and Dan have left the virtual studio. Sis, what's up? What are you thinking?
I know. I had so many questions, and you kept taking them.
What?
I know. Well, one of the ones was, how does a candidate pick the right recruiter for them? Because there's so many big recruiting offices with many recruiters that are recruiting off of maybe 100 different types of roles. And to even what Jake was saying, that you don't know which role is actually high priority for the companies. And so it's really nice to hear a duo that's really working hard to make it as humanistic as possible, rather than just another resume in the filing cabinet. And one of the things that he mentioned, one of the points that Jake mentioned was, that they have conversations with the hiring managers to get to what is the business need of this role? What are we really trying to achieve here, instead of just filling a role? And so many times there's so many companies that unfortunately are just checking off a box, and they're not really paying attention to the candidate that's going into that so-called box. And that's what leads to, retention problems. Just checking off a box, the retention of that candidate in that role for that long isn't there. So when you take the time to really ask those questions as a consulting agency, as they are, to give them the quality candidate, it's just so great to hear.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what Jake was saying. It's not transactional, or try and make it, try and really develop a relationship and provide a quality service means leveraging kind of a humanistic approach. I would imagine that if you got an interview through Jake or another recruitment firm like that, and they put in the time to understand you and understand the needs of the business, that the probability you're going to have a successful interview significantly increases, because there was a lot more vetting that went into who you are and what the business needed before there was ever any interface between the business that is the client and the candidate for a position.
Oh, yeah. Just think about it. Somebody who's there, who's trying to fill this role for a company, is bringing your name into the mix and vetting for you and giving them the heads up of why you would be great. I mean, that's like a referral of a referral on a referral. That's just, you've skipped all these steps, and now you get to be the shining star, it's a great opportunity for people.
Yeah. And also the consulting and the business side. I like the idea of consultants actually engaging the company and make sure they don't solve the wrong problem. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. I mean, you're the HR pro. How many times have you seen somebody trying to fill positions in a department that is poorly structured to begin with? It's like you don't have the right mix, whether it's too many supervisors, not enough supervisors, or specialists of one variety when you need more generalists and T-shaped folks that have a breadth of competency. I mean, you've seen that, right?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes jobs are just slapped up on the website because somebody left, and so now they have an open role, but they don't really sit down to understand what is that role trying to achieve for the business. That sets up with skill sets they really absolutely need that they're now missing, and then narrowing the candidates based on their skill sets and the attributes that they hold. And when they don't do that, then they're just filling another position. And then, it's when you start off at 50% of knowing what's going on and then filling that role, then the likelihood of it increasing to something that's better and greater is much lower now, because you've already started at mid-level, and you want to start here when you have a job posting, because then you know what you're talking about to them, you know what you need. And then the other people that are interviewing know what questions to ask them based on the information that you've already given them. I mean, it's a snowball effect.
So I'm going to take up Jake on his offer. I'm going to send Jake my resume and be like, hey, brother, well, you made the offer to the audience, and I'm like audience member number one. So, no, that's great. Well, it was awesome having both of them come on. It's great to see two service members combining forces and taking some industry knowledge and setting sail for themselves on a business that provides a quality service and creating win-win-win scenarios. I love their story. And listener, if you like their story too, and you like the New Mission Career Transition podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review. You see that segue, that transition I made? Was that smooth or what? You can give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You give us a thumbs up or some positive comments on Spotify. We're pretty much there on YouTube and every other major podcast platform there is. If you want to ask us questions, you can reach out and hit us at newmissionct@gmail.com. That's newmissioncharlietango@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And if you're like me and you're preparing for your own transition, know that I'm right there with you. So until next time, stay focused.